So, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be learning from some adoptive parents in terms of what they've learned about advocacy, and we're hoping that that is going to help you as adoptive parents with your advocacy, advocating for your own children. So, I'm going to ask. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes with each of our panel 4, and what I'd like you to do, if you are if you're a guest, I'd like, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask, you type that into the chat, and then when I've done the interviewing of each of the panel, I will read those questions out, and we'll ask them one of those questions. So we're doing it alphabetically. I'm a little bit left brainy, ladies and gentlemen. So how am I going to do this? I'm going to do it alphabetically. So we're going to start with Chaitra. So thanks for your time, Chaitra. We sent some questions ahead of time. So Chaitra is she's an adopted mum. She's a therapist, and she's also an adoptee. So she brings a huge wealth of lived experience to this. So thank you for coming on the panel, Chaitra. Can I start by asking you, when did your advocacy begin?
I think it began before I even realized I was advocating. I worked in community mental health centers and schools really early in my career, and during college and graduate school. And when I worked with adoptees and fosterees in those counseling spaces, I found that I was doing a lot of advocating in the sense of not wanting people to pathologize them immediately or label them as the problem within the family or the environment. And it wasn't really until going through the process to adopt our child that I realized what I had been doing was advocating. For me, it just felt very natural to encourage people to notice all aspects of adoption instead of just focusing on things they viewed in a pathological way.
Yeah. So we hear this phrase, pathologizing, and why? What does it mean to you, and why do you think? Well, what does it mean to you, and why do you think that we shouldn't do it?
Yeah. Because I think the danger in pathologizing or viewing someone as problematic, labeling them with symptoms and diagnoses, is that we're not considering the whole context a lot of times. And I say that because the diagnostic system in general in the mental health world was created by people who held a lot of privilege. So typically, cisgendered, heterosexual white males who were able-bodied and wealthy. And so their idea of what was considered abnormal or atypical didn't encompass a wide range of people and didn't consider the experiences they had been through. And for most adoptees, what I like to frame it as is you are having a normal reaction to an abnormal event that happened to you that you had no control over. And I think it's really important to recognize the brilliance of the way that so many of us adapt, that even though some of those adaptations may not work as well in our present life, they served us well at one point. They helped us to survive. And I think we have to acknowledge all parts of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason that the Thriving Adoptees logo is a diamond, ladies and gentlemen, is to flip that pathology on its head. So we're looking at the brilliance and the worth of who we are, rather than seeing as the problem. And one of the first things I learned from I was talking to a therapist probably about 3 years or so ago, who works with adoptive parents, and what she said was that sometimes parents come to her and the essence is fix my kid. And that's a kind of a throwback to this pathologizing. And what I've kind of picked up on, I don't know where I got this from, was as adoptive parents, if I'm joining you for the sake of this discussion, it's our ability to not take our kids' trauma personally and not make their trauma personal to them. It's this whole thing about normal experience, normal reaction to an abnormal experience. So why did you go into those fields? Why did you start doing the advocacy work, Chaitra?
So it's interesting. I think, like many adoptees, I'm much better at being compassionate and supportive and advocating for the people I care about than I am for myself. And so it wasn't until we went through the process to adopt our child and going through some of the mandatory trainings that I really recognized how misunderstood adoptees were, and what an important area it was to have this specialty in supporting the mental health of adoptees. I just assumed it was sort of common sense. Everyone knew and understood. And it was going through those trainings and realized just a lot of the misconceptions that were out there, that I realized there was really a need to elevate adoptee voices and experiences and to validate them in some of the more dominant narratives that existed.
Yeah. So for me, the systems, the bureaucracies, they're set up for the mass, aren't they? And as adoptees, we're in a niche, and bureaucracies struggle to reflect the diversity. They're set up for the masses, which means that from what I can gather, talking to other adoptive parents, we have to do more because the system isn't set up for our kids or our families.
Right.
So how would you say that your advocacy has changed over time, Chaitra?
I think it's become more inclusive over time, just being able to acknowledge all of the intersectional identities that adoptees bring to a space. I mean, so often people want to perceive adoptees as a monolith, that we all have exactly the same experiences or journey or needs, when with biologicals, which is what I call people who aren't adopted, right? If they group us, we can group them. So if biologicals, we recognize they have a wide range of experiences, it's really important to acknowledge that for adoptees as well, that we are coming from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different adoption experiences that affect our perception of adoption, and just many different marginalized identities come into the space. So being able to incorporate all voices, elevate all voices, that's not always an easy thing to do, especially even within the adoptee community. So, having compassion for everyone, wherever they're at in the journey, is really important.
Yeah, fantastic. And what would you say your biggest learnings have been over, and continue to learn? Because how old are your kids?
My kiddo is 11.
11, yeah. So what are your biggest learnings? And that process is ongoing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that there are many different ways to advocate. I think it's really easy, especially in the age of social media, to get caught up in feeling like there are certain ways that mean more or matter more, going through legislative kinds of bureaucratic things, or focusing on, the pre-adoption experience or post-adoption experience. I mean, there are so many different ways to advocate, and I think we need to acknowledge each of those and emphasize the role that each of those things play. So, like for me, being able to provide counseling to adoptees is a big part of the way I advocate. I help those people to find their voices and to be able to bring those into the world, or by creating the adoptee therapist directory for the US, where I'm elevating other adoptee therapist voices and services. I think it's just getting as many of our voices out there as we can, and making those the dominant voice in the adoption constellation.
Brilliant. And I was actually going to mention the therapist directory, because it's such a great resource. I've actually used it to bring more therapists onto the show, right? You know, but there'll be a link in the this will go live on YouTube, right? So I'm going to send everybody a link to the recording, and in that recording there'll be links to the panelists' website, and it's beyond words, and a link to the therapist directory, because that's one of the areas that clearly we need specialist help on. I'm just wondering if we could kind of zoom in terms of your personal experience with your own kiddo. What would you say would have been your biggest learnings advocating for them?
I mean, same thing, that there are a lot of different ways to advocate, and in different environments, you need to advocate in different ways. You know, in some spaces, it's important to educate others. In some spaces, it's important to protect your child and focus on that self-preservation. In other spaces, you're helping to guide your child and developing their voice and how they might want to respond to the situation. So I think being flexible is really crucial, in attuning to your child specifically. What are their needs? What's going to fit their personality and preferences? That as parents, we don't need to take over the process of advocating. We need to teach our kids how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. Flexibility. I'm glad you mentioned that word, because I'm glad that you mentioned it, and not so glad, because I was going to use that as a nice way to sum up what you said, right? But I think what I've learned from another adoptive mum that I spoke to is that persistence and flexibility, and also kind of recognizing that the person that you're dealing with is a part of a bureaucracy. So they may be frustrating, but they may be frustrated themselves, because they're trying to work within their constraints. So this happened to me today, like buying some groceries. I was trying to cash a voucher, and this woman said, "Oh, you need your loyalty card to cash the voucher." Now, I think probably a couple of years ago that would have had me fuming, right? But then for some reason it didn't get to me. But I was thinking I could go off and get my knickers into a twist, to use a British thing. So we have to recognize that these people are working within their constraints, and our flexibility and persistence is gonna allow us to get what we need to get for our kids. So thank you very much, Chaitra.
Yeah, thank you.
Much appreciated. So now we're going to bring on Irene. If you could unmute yourself, please, Irene. So is she there? Ask to unmute. Bottom left. Oh, there. We got you. Okay. So same questions for you, Irene. Lovely to see your big smiley face. When did your advocacy begin? This might be a little bit of a rude question, right?
Yeah, since I'm definitely the elder on this panel today, I'm almost 77 years old, so I'm speaking from some years and years of experience. And as Chaitra said, her daughter's 11. My oldest adopted daughter, I have 4 children that we adopted, is 53. So those are the days when everything was closed, everything was secret. Those are the days when somebody got pregnant, they sent them off somewhere else so nobody in the family would know. And that's exactly the situation from our first daughter, who's an amazing woman, by the way. And right after our determination that adoption was going to be our option for a family, because the good Lord said we're going to have a family in a different way than most people do, I was reading and I saw a quote It was by Dickens in Dombey and Son. And it said, "Not an orphan in the wide world can be so deserted as a child who is an outcast from a living parent's love." And that stuck with me so hard. And it put my heart in a different place for our daughter's biological mother and father. Of course, neither we ever met anybody. We had very little information about them. What we did find out later on is most of it wasn't true anyway. But it started that day, and it started in March of 1971, to be honest, because I kept thinking, what's she going to think about this? Is her heart going to feel that abandonment, even as a 10-day-old infant when we got her? After that, we wanted to continue with the family, and so we became foster parents. And it didn't take me long at all to understand that every child is different. Every child's family situation is different, and there are no ways to put them all in one box and say, we treat them one way. Everything had to be individualized. And it was still during a time when, people didn't meet each other. You really didn't have dialogue. You didn't know what was going on. And the kids were stuck in the middle, just stuck in the middle. And nobody was really asking them the questions that they needed to answer in order to best help the child and family. So that's how it all started. And so I guess I started being an advocate at that point. I didn't really know how. And so my world became wrapped up more in the foster care piece of it. But as we fostered for 27 years, we had a lot of children who parental rights were terminated during their stay with us. And we worked really hard to help them make that transition into adoption. And the need that these children had so often when they moved into with their new family, who had been well vetted, who'd had lots of visits with us, some stayed with us in our own house for a week at a time, to try to get to know the kids better. That those kids, when they left, whether they were with us 6 months or 3 years before the adoption occurred, that the adoptive parents would say, but they're sleeping with your picture under their pillow yet. They won't take your family's picture down off the nightstand. I think it just goes to show that connection is so important, and that these children can thrive and survive, right? Or survive and thrive if we show them the love that we need, and that we're not going to give up on them, and that we're not going to forget them when they're not with us, right? And so that seemed to be a big thing for me as well. And I know that Vera Fahlberg always said every child deserves an irrational advocate. And I think that's what many people have told me I became over the years, is almost an irrational advocate, because I fought so hard for every one of those kids and all kids that were coming into the systems of foster care and adoption.
Yeah. That's stealing. I've spoken with Irene a few times, not so much recently, but you were one of the first guests that came on the show, and steeliness is what came across, but steeliness with a smile, right?
Absolutely. If you don't have a sense of humor in all this, you might as well just throw your hands up and walk away, because it's hard. It's hard. And I think the pathological piece of all this stuff too is, I learned very quickly as a foster parent that I believe maybe half of what I was told about the child that was going to come visit, be a part of our family for a while, right? Because most of it oftentimes played out to be a bunch of bunk. I'm just being very, very honest. And I can, now that I'm retired and I'm not working in the industry anymore. And that every child and every family that was associated with those children deserved to have an honest review and an open eye and open heart to what their needs were, to try to heal families, get children back with their parents, and if not, then to help them move in the best way we could onto the next phase, which hopefully was going to be adoption. Yeah. And then the whole piece of all of that really came home to me when our oldest daughter, like I say, her name is Wendy, when she was 15, she wrote a poem to me, put it on my pillow, asking me to help her find her birth mother. It's a beautiful poem, and if we have time, I'd love to read it to you, but that really put into perspective for me that how important open adoptions were and should be. And so her poem was actually published in the first book on open adoption that was written by Lainey Silver and trying to think what the other lady's name was. I can't right off the bat. Oh, Pat Dorner. And it's a wonderful book, and it just really goes into why these kids need connection and the types of connections that can be a possibility for children who are adopted. And it didn't address enough of, I think, the issues of how do the adoptive parents feel about all this sometimes, and the threat and all of that. But the amazing thing about my daughter's poem was she addressed that for me in her poem. Very wise at 15.
Please share. Please, if you've got the poem there, it'd be great.
I do. Okay, it's called A Mother's Real Love. She wrote this in 1986 when she was 15. So it's got two parts. Every mother, as you can plainly see, wants her daughter to be as happy as can be. I have an interesting tale to tell that expresses this very well. When she was just 17, she gave birth to a baby girl. She loved this baby very much, more than anything else in the world. She decided she didn't have the money or life to bring her up just right, so she gave her up for adoption so she could have a family just right. I am that baby girl, though not a baby anymore, and I appreciate the special love, for it's such a powerful feeling sent from God above. I have a very special family now, but I admit I have to inquire about the woman who gave me life before my life will be entire. This woman had strength and lots of courage and lots of help from above. This woman had a special gift. She had a mother's real love. And then comes part two. Another woman who gave me a lot is a mother I have now. She didn't give me life, but she did fulfill it somehow. This woman is who I call Mom, the only mom I know. I love her very much, and I hope that I let it show. She and my family mean more to me than anything else in the world, and I hope she will always think of me as her baby girl. I love you, Mom, very much, you see, but when I want to find the woman who gave me life, please feel at ease and assist me. She gave me life, but you fulfilled it, and no one can take your place. Sure, I want to meet her and even be a friend and talk to her face to face. But you have no reason to worry. You also had help from above. You also have a special gift. You have a mother's real love.
Wow. That's brilliant. And that's...
To this day, I can hardly read it without crying.
Yeah.
All these...
That's 38 years ago, whatever. Your daughter wrote that. Yeah, it gets you going. I've got a letter from my birth mother that I got in the adoption file. So that was written 57 years ago, and I read it 10 years ago, and it still gives me goosebumps. No, yeah. like that does.
Very much so.
So it sounds like too small a question, but on the back of that big love thing, right? But what would you say are your biggest learnings from that advocacy?
I think the biggest learnings I've had over the years from personal experience and watching other adoptees and family adoption experiences is that connection to some extent is important. The sense of belonging, the sense of being loved, valued, is important. Now, for some kids that go through foster care first, who've come into the system because the parents were not effectively parenting their children, there are additional needs that have to be, wounds that have to be healed as much as possible. But I also learned that in that process, some never heal, but you can put salve on them and help them, not feel quite so sore. And our two boys, who are our second and third adoptions, both were children from foster care. Both had reactive attachment disorder diagnoses and were very, very challenging to raise. And we wanted to throw our hands up so many times, but we wouldn't. And again, that's that irrational advocate piece that comes in. And my boys tell me now, and they're like, oh boy, 47 and 50 now, that Mommy, you saved our life because you never, ever gave up, no matter how awful it was. We were at that supper table. I didn't care how bad it was, or where we were, or how many day treatment programs we had to go to. You had some for supper to sit around the table and be a part of that family. And you always said, you'll get here. You'll get where you need to be. And we're going to do it with you in your time. It's your timeline. I can't set your timeline for you because you're the only one who can do that. And they come back to me often, and just as they have their children and their grandchildren, they both have grandchildren now, you know, talking about where would my life be if you'd have given up? What if you'd had dad and said, we can't do this anymore. The disruption is just too much. Yeah. And I might add, one of the other things in our fourth adoption was a baby girl with Down syndrome and a very, very, very bad heart. And Wendy, who wrote the poem, walked in from work one day, and she was 13, and she said, Mama, I just watched the news and I saw my new baby sister. She needs to be adopted. She has a really bad heart. She has Down syndrome. And I said, well, Wendy, why do you think that's going to be your sister? And she said, because God told me in my heart, that's going to be your sister. Talk to your mom and daddy. Well, she became our child. And she's 40 years old. She was 40 years old this in May. Yeah. And is just a marvelous woman and a miracle, again, after many surgeries and challenges. But when she joined our family, there was a different need than the other kids had. It was different. She was intellectually disabled. She had a little understanding of really what had happened to her, what was happening to her. And she radiated an absolutely relentless love for everybody. And she had the most calming effect on our boys of anything that happened to them in their years of growing up was that little girl. They love her totally, fiercely, as she loves them. But the dynamics of each child, especially for families who are going to adopt multiple times, have to be individualized and looked at separately. What you learn from the first one is not going to be what you learn from the second one. I can guarantee it, or the third or the fourth, because they're different. And I don't think there's enough recognition about always knowing that you don't know enough, that you have to keep seeking answers, seeking ideas, whatever it is, in order to best meet the needs of this new child. And it takes energy, it takes effort, it takes determination. Sometimes you get really tired, but in the end, it's worth it. So, you know, we've got these 4 kids, and unbelievable. We have 22 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren already from these. And of course, Melissa, it doesn't have any kids. So as I tell you about the rest of them, they love family. And they had, for many practical reasons, especially the boys, to not react that way.
Thank you, Irene.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your time today.
Mm-hmm.
So, Laurie, could you unmute yourself?
Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody.
How are you doing?
I am great. I have an open window because it's hot today, and every once in a while, a rogue neighbor dog somewhere out there is barking. And if Zoom doesn't filter that out, just start raising your hand and I'll close my window.
Yeah, leave the window open. So, when did your advocacy begin?
My kids are now, I have 2 kids and they're in their early 20s. And when they were maybe 3 and 5, I joined some adoption forums. This is before even Facebook. And I knew everything there was about adoption because I had adopted successfully, and I had a friend in elementary school all the way through college who was adopted. And so, and my child's birth mother and I kind of fell into an easy open adoption relationship, which was kind of new at the time. So I was an expert. It's very cringy to think back on. So I entered into some forums trying to share all that I had figured out, and got spanked, thankfully, by people who knew a lot more than me, who were not adoptive parents. Because what I came into this with is what so many in our culture come in with, which is the adoptive parent perspective. And so it was a humbling experience, but it also made me super curious, because I realized, oh my gosh, there are things I don't know about the experience of being adopted that I better get up to speed on, so that I can show up in a better way for my kiddos. And certainly this knowing it all already closed system is not going to serve them. So that was that wasn't my advocacy, but that was the start of me getting to know a lot of people who had different experiences in adoption than I did. So along the way, I just listened a lot and realized that the adoptive parent narrative needed to be rounded out by other things. And so I started helping with that, working on that front with other people to share not only adoptive parenting information, but also adoptee experience and birth parent experience from the sources.
Well, because we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And so thank you for everybody for taking the time today to come out, spend time with us, because we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, how could I write the blurb for this webinar? Because I'm an adoptee, I'm not an adoptive parent, so how do I know? I don't know what I don't know. So the curiosity and flexibility and personalization are themes coming across strongly. So I want to ask, how was your advocacy? How was it impacted by this revelation that there was more that you needed to learn?
Oh, it blew it wide open from, like I said, from a closed system to an open system, where, oh my gosh, if I didn't know that, then what else is there that I didn't know? So, the dimensions and the complexity of adoption, just since that point in time, this was in the mid 2000s, just started revealing themselves. And there's this rabbit hole, and there's this. And I think for me, it was like, I need to hear a lot more birth parent stories. I need to understand birth parent experiences, because what I thought it was, which was from the closed adoption era, where birth moms went on and had complete full lives, and there was no grief for anybody. And then also on the adoptee side, that the adoptee comes into your home, you love them like they're your own, and you gave birth to them, and adoption is no big deal. All of those things turned out to be wrong. There was a lot of complexity behind all of that, and 1,001 stories, probably 1,001 stories, because every person has their own. And so trying to find the themes in those stories that had been overlooked by the narrative that our culture understands about adoption.
Yeah. The stuff that I don't, if I think about advocacy as an adopted parent, I think about, getting the school on board, getting the right therapists on board. I think about the social services stuff. Those are the things that kind of pop into my head. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you can share from that perspective? Because we've been here like half an hour or so, and we haven't looked at that.
Yeah, I think for me, where I was at the time when this happened was I was blogging in infertility circles. So my advocacy started in sharing what I was learning with other people who had been through infertility and who were parenting through adoption. So it was sharing with other adoptive parents the ahas that I'd been having. Over time, and writing was my thing. So my daughter's birth mom helped me with the book that we put out for people parenting through adoption called The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption. And that was my way of advocating and saying, we need to reorient here from the adoptive parent perspective to the adoptee perspective. And, that came out 11 years ago. And, you look back at any previous work and you see how much you didn't know at that time. So I've spent the last 11 years on my own podcast, interviewing a lot of adoptees, birth parents, therapists, and bringing that to adoptive parents, again, to just help the reorienting of what we know from the adoptive parent perspective to other perspectives. So mine is through writing, and through the writing, sometimes it does go into other areas like schools and therapy. I'm working with my co-authors on getting into academic schools for social work and therapy to include Adoption Unfiltered, the book that I wrote with Sarah Easterly and Kelsey Vandervliet-Renyard, as a textbook or a supplemental textbook for those kind of things, working with within the legal system, working with adoption professionals for staff development, advocating for expanding our viewpoint of what adoption is.
Cool. And what would you say have been your biggest learnings through that?
I think it would be that, I have this image of like infinity mirrors where you have a mirror in front of you and a mirror behind you. And there's no end to it. And that's how I feel about the complexity of adoption. You could probably study this even longer than Dr. Joyce McGuire-Pavo, who's been in this her whole life. And there's still going to be new things that come up, that people experience, new ahas that we can have. So it's just the endless depth of the complexities of adoption.
Thank you. And just for this video is going to be up on my YouTube, listeners, and so what we on the YouTube you can find other advocacy trainings with Dr. Joyce McGuire-Pavo as one of the ladies who came on. She's an adoptee and a therapist and a force for change within the adoptive thing. So thank you, Laurie. Is there anything else that you'd like to?
Yeah, I did just want to say one way that my advocacy has changed over the years is it's gotten a lot more collaborative. I really like doing the podcasts like you do. You get so much from working with other people, presenting with other people, writing with other people, because that really is almost necessary to round out what everybody knows about adoption, which is that win-win narrative. And so I've really enjoyed my journey of collaboration.
Brilliant. And most of the people in this space are up for that collaboration. I would encourage everybody to explore that. There are certain people that I know of one podcaster who is not up for that, but that person is the only person that I've come across in the last 3.5 years of doing this and 500 episodes. So people make this one-to-one, make this one-to-many, make this about collaboration.
What is that saying? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with people.
Yeah. Well, so my impatience used to be kept me on my own. But when I started the podcast, I was sure that I wanted it to bring as many different voices into the space as well. So it slows us down, but it greatly adds to the quality. Yeah. So thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. How can we see?
Hello.
Hopefully it'll pop up in a minute.
Is my picture not showing?
Oh yeah, We got you.
Oh,
We got you.
okay.
We got you, Mallory. So, what are you making of this so far?
What's that?
What are you making of this so far, of the webinar so far?
Enlightening. It's always interesting to listen to the different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah. So, when did your advocacy begin, Mallory?
So I think it was back in 2012. I served as a court-appointed special advocate, a CASA, for about a year. But it was when I became a foster parent that I feel like my advocacy really began. And so that entire process was kind of like an awakening to me, not just to the challenges and ongoing trauma that foster children face, but it kind of opened up some of my own past wounds, because I'm adopted too. And so healing alongside my daughter, it's been hard, but it's also been transformative. It's just hard to watch somebody that you love go through tough times and not do anything with what you've learned. And so I think it was last year, we obtained some funding from the state, which is when I began my nonprofit, and we offer foster parents monthly trauma-informed workshops at no cost. Yeah. Kind of partner with DCS too, Indiana Department of Child Services, to offer those foster parents a training hour.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it's open to adoptive parents too, obviously.
So is there anything that you can bring in from the stuff that you're doing with your daughter in terms of the school stuff, or the therapist stuff, or the social, the practical stuff, rather than this macro? We've had quite a lot of macro, and I'm wondering if we can narrow it down to some micro stuff.
Yeah, just kind of based off the workshops, I guess. Are you talking specifically about the workshops?
No,
or just in general?
I'm talking about the gems that you have picked up and that you're continuing to pick up in terms of the stuff that you're doing outside of the professional stuff and the non-profit side, but in terms of stuff for your daughter.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, a lot of, like, even, going back to the workshops, like, a lot of the topics are driven off of, my own personal experiences with her, and as an adopted person, as well as we collaborate a lot with the adoption community and the foster care community. So yeah, I mean, I'm learning as we go through these things. I'm learning things myself that I wasn't aware of, which I've been able to transfer kind of into my parenting with her.
How trauma informed do you think the schools are? What's your
not very.
And so what, I mean, is that an area that you're looking at it? I mean, how do you overcome that lack of knowledge to try and get what you want for your daughter?
Just kind of communicating, with the school, sending lots of emails, trying to give them like little doses of trauma-informed education, I guess, depending on what the situation is.
Yeah. It's, Laurie was talking about collaboration, and I'm wondering, I'll just throw it out there as a question, right? Does anybody know of anything that's going on in terms of trauma-informed schools and adoption trauma-informed schools? Is anybody aware of stuff that's going on? I can see Laurie nodding ahead.
Heather Forbes has an annual conference that's huge that is trying to reach that niche.
Okay, so I'll do some Googling and I've spoken to Heather. I interviewed Heather years ago, early on, right? And my 57-year-old brain doesn't always remember it. So I'll put links into that. So if people are interested in that, thank you, Laurie. So how's the advocacy changing for you, Mallory? how's your advocacy changing as your daughter gets older?
Yeah, so I mean, another thing too on this journey is just kind of the shift in focus from solely on her to kind of engaging with diverse members of the adoption constellation. So I've had conversations with adult adoptees, previous foster youth, even birth moms, not just the foster and adopted parents. And everybody has kind of like their own unique stories. And so, yeah, it's been a lot to like learn and pick up from.
So collaboration and communication. And Mallory, yeah. I was on it she asked me if I'd join the board of the Mallory's mission, the work that she's doing. So I said yes, like I do, instinctively. Yeah. So other than that collaboration and the communication piece, is there anything else that you'd like to share as your biggest learnings? And like Chaitra, this is an ongoing process. This isn't done.
Yeah, I think the learning's like never ending. I think, I'm sure we're all aware, but it's when you're doing this work, sometimes it involves just challenging some of your own deeply held worldviews, which is hard. And so that means, unlearning, relearning, to better support the needs of our children and ourselves, I think. And so, yeah, I think my perspective has shifted a lot as a foster parent just through these past few years. I mean, a story I used to kind of tell myself was, that my birth mother didn't want me, like plain and simple, end of story. And then as you kind of like walk through this journey alongside your child and witness a birth mother and her struggles, you realize that there's a lot of complexity behind it. And so, yeah, I think learning to kind of go along with the flow of like the uncomfortableness and stuff leads to a lot of growth.
Yeah, I think this. I think an adoptee said this to me yesterday, because we talk about openness and curiosity, lifelong learning, all these different words that we bandied around. And I think it was somebody said to me yesterday, or it might have just been something that popped into my head in terms of like a more specific way of putting that. No, it was somebody interviewing me. So it's an adoptee who's making a film, and she was saying, what would you want to say in the film? And how would you sum it up, Simon? And I said, willingness to be wrong. Right. I don't think we can make perspective shifts happen. I don't think we can't like go, I want to change my mind about we can't make. But what happens is the change happens naturally if our ears are open enough and we're kind of willing to be wrong. And so it's back to that communication thing. It's back to the communication, the collaboration. We kind of like I talk about this like hanging out at the bus stop for insights. Right, we're hanging out at the bus stop for insights. The insights are going to change us from within. That's what a shift in perspective is. That's what Mallory is talking about. So all we can do is hang out at the bus stop for insights. And the good news is that's what you're doing now by giving an hour of your time up to come on this webinar. You're putting yourself in the space where light bulbs might go off, and basically that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast. I interview guests on what they've learned in the hope that their learnings catalyze learnings within the listeners, and we all move on and we learn and we grow together. So thank you very much, Mallory.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the tricky thing when you're communicating with just foster and adoptive parents is, they want like a definite answer on certain things, and sometimes there's not one just because there's so much nuance to everything.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like me being impatient. It's like, I think we're brought up right, you know, right and wrong, you know, ethically, we're right and wrong answers. We're educated in that. We're educated in that space, into that rut, and it ain't the world. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Mallory. So I'm just going to put the chat up now and see if we've got anything. Okay, so this is one for Irene. Trishal is asking, I hope I pronounced that right. Could I have the name of the book that Irene mentioned, please? So you need to. I don't know.
There you go.
Oh yeah.
You know, I can't find my copy of the book, and I can't remember it. But when I find it, I'll send it to Simon.
Okay. So if you email me,
yeah, I still lend that book a lot. People want to read that book, and it's a wonderful book. Like I say, it was published so many years ago. I don't think it's in print anymore. That's part of the problem. But I'll do my best to find that. I don't remember who I gave it to last, but anyway. You could probably look by authors.
So who were the authors?
Pat Dorner.
Yeah.
Patricia Dorner, Dorner, and Kathleen Silber, Silbe.
Okay. I will check that out. Right. And I'm not going to forget Pat, because my birth mother's name was Pat. Right.
Awesome. Awesome.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you'd finished, and I was too quick. Unmute yourself again, Irene.
I might just say that poem led to a very successful reunification with our daughter's birth mother and her family. It took about 2 years of the mother deciding that she was going to let the cat out of the bag. After all those years, she had 2 more children by then. Her stepfather, who had been her father since she was 3 years old, didn't even know she'd had this baby. I mean, her aunts and uncles, nobody knew except her mother.
Wow.
And because she had been sent away. And so she had a lot to do before she could meet Wendy. It has been a beautiful. She was at her high school graduation. She was, when she went off to the Army, when she came home from Desert Storm, for the birth of her children. I mean, it's been a wonderful thing. And they talk about once every 3 months or so. They're good friends. I've been to their weddings and funerals and things for their family. It just, you know, if we could have started out that way, 15 years sooner, what a joy that would have been for all of them.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you. So I've just Vin is on the in the audience. I think is that the right word for a webinar? In the audience today. So Vin is an adoptee in Australia. And he's been on the podcast a few times. He's a great guy, and he runs, like a practical way that people can collaborate and communicate. He runs a group for, and it has adoptive parents, and it also has adoptees in it. So I will link to that in the YouTube. So when you get a link to the video, everybody, that'll be in there. Do you want to come on and say hello, Vin, so people know your face?
Hi, everyone.
Oh, look.
So just to clarify really quickly, so the parent group is called Prospective and Adoptive Parent Information Group, led by adoptees. So it's a team of adoptees from around the world that help educate parents to give them the tools and understandings that adoptees and adult adoptees and children adoptees go through.
Right. Thank you for that clarification, buddy. And loving the look that you've got a hoodie, you've got a hat on, chilly.
It's like -2 and freezing at the moment, and 3 o'clock in the morning, so it's so cold. Yeah.
So here we are for dedication. So. Vin is joining us at 3 o'clock in the morning. Slightly nuts, I would say. I don't think I've gone that late. I did do a webinar for adoptive parents in New Mexico at 1 o'clock in the morning last March, but at 3 o'clock you beat me by a couple of hours. And just while I'm talking about this, I'll do a quick shout out. So I have done quite a lot of talks to adoptive parents and social workers in adoption agencies. That is what, along with the podcast and doing these webinars, that's what really floats my boat. So if you are, what the adoptive parents love is the input from adoptees, like Vin's talking about, right? So because our trauma for so many of us is pre-verbal, right? We haven't got a handle on it until later in life, when we come out of the fog and we become conscious of the subconscious trauma that was going on for us. So what adoptive parents want is insights from adoptees that have been through some of the darkness and come out of the other side, right? They're getting a lived experience for stuff they can't put into words. So if you're looking, that's what I do, right? So if you or your agency is looking for, your parent group is looking for a speaker, I'd be delighted to hear from you. So that's great. Thanks, Vin. So Laurie in the chat has put beyond consequences schools. That must be Heather Forbes's stuff. So Heather Forbes is the woman who is doing work for trauma-informed education schools. Steve Coppard, he's added some text in here talking about Nebraska. So if you're in that part of the world, go and check him out. Steve has found a copy of the poem online. So that's Irie's copy online. And who we got? And we've got Cheryl. So Cheryl Prue from Adoption. She's a birth mother now that now runs the agency that helped her place her son like 38 years ago. I think it might be 36. I can't remember. Cheryl, and that's in Canada, I think. That's right. Great to see you here, Cheryl. And she's put the book in there, Children of Open Adoption, Kathleen Silver and Patricia Dorner. And Steve's just dropped his email address in there if people want to get in touch with him. So are there any other questions people want to put in the chat or unmute themselves and ask something, or we'll bring it in. I love finishing on time. Sometimes I manage to do it and sometimes I don't, but my mum likes it because she gets a call at 6 o'clock, right? So have we got anything else, or we'll bring it in? Let me just see. So Vin's putting in the chat, prospective and adoptive parent information group led by adoptees. So I'll put a link in that on the YouTube video as well. And thank you everybody for coming along today. Thank you for our panelists. I'm doing the collaboration, right? So I don't know anything about advocacy for adoptive parents, only the stuff that I hear from others. So I'm delighted that they could share that stuff with you. Thank you, Stephen. I called him Steve, might be a bit too familiar. Maybe he's not a Steve, maybe he wants to be a Stephen. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Jennifer. Hopefully Jennifer's coming over to the UK from the States, so hopefully you're going to see her in York in August. Thank you very much. Any questions, reach out to me, Simon at Thriving Adoptees. I'm guessing that's Jay, is it? Is that Jay from We Are Family? Is it Jay? Maybe it's, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, yes it is.
It is Jay. Hello, Jay.
Hello.
Long time no speak. Lovely to see you. or to see your logo anyway.
Well, indeed. Thank you.
Lots
so
of love.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Simon. Tell your mum hi.
Yeah, I will do. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you.
Thanks, Si.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Vin. See you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.